Undoubtedly, war is terrible. But a civil war is even more terrible when politics makes sane people fight with each other, even friends, relatives and loved ones. It is generally accepted that there were no major military confrontations in Kazakhstan, as in neighboring Russia, after the 1917 revolution. According to historical data, the change of power here was relatively calm and without major casualties. However, there was one of the bloodiest battles between Red detachments and White Guards. What happened then in Semirechye can be considered a symbol of courage and fortitude of ordinary people who came to these lands for a peaceful life, built houses, raised children and cultivated land. But one day they had to take up arms in order to defend themselves against former fellow men. Residents of 12 villages held defense from the many thousands of White Guard troops for more than a year. What are the secrets of the confrontation that went down in history as the Cherkassk defense? Violence of the White Guards in Cherkassk.
Людей закапывали.
People were buried in the middle of the road, and then cavalry galloped there, and the heads flew to the sides. The horses knocked them down. A priest who commanded the Bolsheviks' detachment. So was he a priest? He was. Moreover, his patients were priests too. How did ordinary peasants resist the experienced ataman's army?
Сами лили пули.
They cast bullets themselves. It is interesting that the young people raided Balkhash. They wanted to deliver salt for the participants of the Cherkassk defense. Facts, legends and riddles of the Cherkassk defense. Watch right now.
История гражданской войны, которая началась в 1900...
The history of the Civil War, which began in 1917, is a separate layer of the past of once a big country. Despite the fact that this subject has been studied and researched by a huge number of historians, nevertheless it keeps many secrets and mysteries. My name is Andrei Slozhin, it is the Time Puzzle, and today I will tell you the story of one small village of Cherkasskoye, where one of the bloodiest events of our history occurred. Cherkasskoye or Cherkassk is a small village located in the Sarkhan district of Almaty region, 200 kilometers from the city of Taldykorgan. Now there are no more than 1,000 people living here. However, this very place 100 years ago was the epicenter of important events that not only influenced the history of the region, but changed it. It was here that a tragedy occurred that divided families of immigrants from Ukraine and Siberia who came to build a new life in Semirechye. By historical standards, the village of Cherkassk was formed near the garrison, which defended the borders with China. But the trouble came here quite from the other side. The senior scientific employee of the Museum of History of the Sarkhan region, Toleokan Bitimbayev, told us how it started.
Cherkassk қорғанысы 1910 жылдан бастап тұрып,
The history of the Cherkassk fortress begins in 1910. When the Lapsinsky district was formed here, the peasants who did not have their own land began to move from the inner Russia. And the soil is very fertile here. Most of the settlers were soldiers who took part in the bloody First World War. The main goal of all these events was that the settlers had to supply the needs of the garrison, which stood guard over the border. Local residents were engaged in cattle breeding, the settlers grew potatoes, melons and wheat. The products were sold in Lapsinsk. Before the revolution, there were many enterprises that belonged to the large merchants of the Semirechye. Many kept apiaries. The fame of local honey has spread far beyond Cherkassk and Lapsinsk. The sweet delicacy was annually delivered to the table of the Romanov family, and in 1913, local honey was recognized as the best in the country. The land here is so fertile that the locals collected record harvests of grain. People also grew sunflowers for the production of oil, which subsequently was sold to visiting merchants. It is curious that the village got its name because of a surveyor who divided the territories between the migrants. The head of the Museum of History of the Sarkand region, Yekaterina Raketskaya, told us about it. And these are resettlement villages which were formed in 1909, 10 and 12. Ukrainian immigrants from the Chernigov, Poltava and Kharkov provinces came here in search of free land. The village of Cherkasskaya was established between 1909 and 1912. It got its name from the surveyor who measured the land. His surname was Cherkasov. Hence our village became Cherkassk. The things in the region were relatively quiet before the October Revolution of 1917, but even these events at first did not particularly worry the locals. People continued to work. Only occasionally the news came that power in some cities and counties was replaced. Of course, there were people sympathizing with the new government. The Bolshevik moods were hovering in the air, but most peasants avoided them. People had other worries. However, already at the end of 1918, the leader of the White Movement, Alexander Kolchak, seeing that Asia was becoming more and more imbued with the ideas of the Bolsheviks, issued a decree on the capture of Semirechye, then the city of Verny and Tashkent, in order to unite with the Turkestan opponents of the Reds. For this, he decided to transfer a division from Semipalatinsk to this region.
Гражданская война в Семиречье – это Черкасская оборона.
The civil war in Semirechye district is the Cherkassk defense. It was in 1918-1919. 13 villages decided not to obey the White Power, the White Army, which was led by Dutov, Arenkov, Gulidov and other generals. Well, actually, they were all messengers of Kolchak. In fact, there were not 13 villages but 12, and by the way, not all residents supported the Bolsheviks. Those who came here early and were more prosperous took the side of White Army. People literally split into two groups. The first supported Boris Arenkov in his struggle against Bolshevism. The latter refused to do it flatly. A terrible confrontation began. Participants of the Cherkassk defense say that one brother could be with Arenkov, the second brother could be with the Reds. When I started working in 1974, then there were participants of the Cherkassk defense. They were still alive, who directly took part in the Cherkassk defense. And they said that there were 20,000 soldiers, well armed, with Japanese and English weapons. And they were well-trained people of high stature, strong built. And a Soviet fortified area completely disarmed stood against them. Each sharp piece of iron planted on a tree was considered a weapon. The line of defense stretched for 70 kilometers. More than 30,000 people stood shoulder to shoulder protecting their home. They were adults. They were very young participants of the Cherkassk defense who were 8 to 12 years old. They were collecting pieces of exploding shells from the battlefield. You saw in the museum a mock-up of cannons, which were loaded with shrapnel of exploded shells, gunpowder. It had no fighting action. However, in the camp of the enemy, they said that the defenders had some new type of weapons, which they did not have. Later, the Soviet writer, revolutionary and political figure Dmitry Furmanov wrote about this resistance and preparations for the siege in his book, The Rebellion. 30,000 peasants with children and women went to the Cherkasskaya settlement. We fortified it, we dug trenches, we made fence, we hid as we could. And it was clear for us, the end is won. It's better to die in battle, and we fought. We fought fearlessly. This trench is nothing but a trench of the first line of the Cherkassk defense. Just imagine how much blood was poured here. Till now there are so many bullets in the soil. If we plant gardens in the spring, a half bucket of cartridges, unexploded hand grenades, all these could be found here. And all those weapons belong to the White Army. Coming up next, a priest who commanded the Bolsheviks detachment. So was he a priest? He was. Moreover, his parents were priests too. One of the leaders of the Red Partisans, the first commander of the troops of the Cherkassk defense, Mstislav Alexandrovich Nikolsky, lived and worked here in 1918-1919.
Среди множества героев можно бы назвать такую фамилию.
There is one man among many heroes, Nikolsky, a priest who switched sides to the Soviets.
Мало того, настолько он был уважаем и авторитетен в массах.
Moreover, he was so admired and respected among the villagers, Cossacks, the grain growers, that he was chosen as the commander of the Cherkassk defense.
Значит, Черкасской обороны.
The defense headquarters was in the village of Cherkasskoye. By the way, its building is the only one that has been preserved in the village since that time. It is a museum now. Strange and paradoxical as it may sound, a minister of religious worship led the defense of the Bolsheviks, which of course was a rarity at that time. After all, one of the main ideas of Bolshevism was the struggle against any religions. He covered his Bolshevik activities under the priest's cassock. So was he a priest? He was. Moreover, his parents were priests too. He had that illegal literature, which he kept and for which he was beaten, even before Annenkov. Already at that time, the White Guards kept an eye on him. He was followed, therefore he left to Pokatilovka. There was a 3-day defense in Pokatilovka, and then in the village of Cherkassk, he led the defense. For the Bolsheviks, the Cherkassk defense was of great importance. After all, the local residents kept the main forces of the White Guards from breaking through to the Semiratia in order to get the Reds out of this region and not allow them to solidify there. Nikolsky repeatedly sent to Tashkent requests for help. People and weapons were needed because villagers were mostly peaceful people who did not have the experience of conducting military operations. According to historians, only a third of those resisting had military experience, whereas the enemy had well-trained, battle-hardened soldiers.
Каждое село – это маленькая крепость. Были созданы, значит, отряды.
Each village was a small fortress. Self-defense units were created. The badge of the Red Squads was the red tape on a hat, or something like that. Most often the commanders were people who passed the First World War and who returned from the front. Nikolsky, despite his Bolshevik activities, continued to serve in the local church. He had no military experience, but this did not stop him from developing and organizing a defense plan. The priest literally in a day collected all the weapons in the village and gave it to the rebels. Later, he also set up a workshop for the repair of weapons. He created a unit that was responsible for the production of gunpowder, cartridges and grenades, and also organized a hospital where wounded villagers were treated.
Совет идеологиясында жаңағы Совет өкіметі келгеннен кейін
Historians presented those events as particularly important in the Soviet annals.
істегенде болып тұрып 74 жыл тек қана біздің санамызда Черкасск қорғанысы келген.
Of course, they were important. They're also important for the Zhatesu region. The Cherkassk battle will not be forgotten.
Сонан кейін барып жаңағы жақсылық
Now we know for certain how the battle began.
осындай оқиға алды орында деп тұр. Сөйтіп сонда Черкасск қорғанысы болды.
2 cavalry regiments of the Kyrgyz arrived first,
Ал енді соғысқанда
and then the Dungans.
өзінде бірінші бастап келген
Later it turned out that the Dungan regiment was formed in China,
қырғыздың
in the Xinjiang region.
полктары келген. Бір Дунганмен келген. Дунган полк ол артынан барып жаңа зерттеліп табылды.
There were many Kazakhs among them. In other words, it was almost Kazakh regiment.
Сол үш полк келген екен. Сол кездерде осы жерде
Also, there was one man, a religious man, Mstislav Nikolsky, a priest. He gathered 50,000 people from nearby villages, organized a headquarters, and led the battle.
штабын құрып, осы жерде осы тойтарыс береді. Артынан барып бұларға қызыл әскерлер келе бастайды.
He commanded the soldiers who participated in the First World War. They made almost 30% of the troops. They were immigrants. They all fought bravely.
Соғыста болған екен осы Черкас қорғансын дегенде. Сондықтан да бұлар өте үлкен ерлік жасаған.
However, Nikolsky never received the requested help. Nevertheless, the leadership of the Bolsheviks decided to help Cherkassk. To do this, they sent the first pilot of Semirechye, Alexander Shavrov, to the region.
Когда он делал перелет, значит, верный Черкасск, он летел через Талдыкурган. В районе школы Ломоносова.
When he was flying from Verny to Cherkassk, he flew through the Taldykurgan. In the area of the Lomonosov school, there was a takir, a dried-up swamp. The locals ran to this takir because they saw a black bird flew, and then it sat down. And then a man came out, all in black. He was dressed in leather jacket and leather trousers. He took his sunglasses off. In general, they were really impressed. He stayed here about 2 hours. Shavrov was then taken to the city center to talk, and after that he flew on. Shavrov was sent to the northern Semirechye front, where he was doing a great deal. Intelligence, distribution of propaganda materials, leaflets. He supported Cherkassk in word and deed.
Черкасцев.
The fate of Shavrov is sad. In 1919, he was arrested by the rebellious units of the Red Army and shot in the village of Abakumovka. Many historians believe that it happened because of the whites who launched disinformation to the Bolsheviks that he was a double agent, and that he was introduced into the ranks of the Red Army men as a spy. They did not pursue an investigation. There was no trial either. Most likely, the main arguments in the accusation were related to the past of Alexander, the son of a clergyman, a former captain of the Royal Army, besides a scout. Shavrov's body was thrown into the well, and the bodies of horses and camels were piled on top. Then they covered it with stones. The fate of the priest Bolshevik Nikolsky is also tragic and shrouded in secrets. According to one version, he went to Verny for help. They refused. After that, he went to Turkestan. But on the way to Turkestan, Nikolsky learned that the defense had fallen. So he decided to stay and got a job with local fishermen. During the next fishing, Nikolsky fell overboard, caught a cold and soon died. According to another version, Nikolsky was removed from the post of Chief of Defense on charges of abuse of power and shot on the verdict of the Revolutionary Courts Martial. As researchers and historians admit, the confrontation between Annenkov's army and the Red Army in Cherkassk was so unique according to military operations that this topic raised more questions than answers. And this despite the fact that everything has been studied rather well. Thus, it is for certain known that Annenkov conducted an active correspondence with his opponents, the Red commanders. The facts of negotiations between the conflicting parties about a temporary ceasefire are also documented. There are cases of transitions of fighters from one army to another, as for example the history of the detachment of the Red Partisans Mountain Eagles of Tabagatai. Its leader was someone Ilarion Lukin, who in the past was a comrade in arms of Annenkov, and his story is very curious. Ilarion Lukin was a hereditary Cossack for a long time, was in the service of Boris Annenkov. It is not known for sure why, but in the end he left for Red Commander Ivan Mamontov.
Ivan Mamontov қызыл әскер командирінің отряды болып,
There was such a person, Ivan Mamontov, officer of the Red Army. Soviet ideology described him as a hero, a fighter for justice, fearless commander and comrade. But in 1992, after the December events, Dinmukamed Kunayev came here. Then he told us that that man was not who we used to think of him. Later we learned the true face of Mamontov. what he actually did.
артынан барып білдік жаңағы бұл кісілер
He exterminated the local Kazakhs, killed them, whole families, settlements. He hated them. That is, during the civil war beginning with the city of Verny, this officer of the Red Army began his bloody path. Naturally, the locals went against such treatment, and they cursed Mamontov.
қарсы қойып алған көп нәрселерді.
After the fall of the next village in the chain of Cherkassk defense, Mamontov stepped back. Lukin went to the mountains. Here he began to conduct subversive activities, fighting with local villagers who supported Ataman Anenkov. According to the reminiscences of Ilarion Lukin, he decided to stop it. For this, in the night of December 1918, he made a sortie to the nearby village of Aksakovka in order to shoot the local head. The same thing was done with the head of the village, Petrovskaya. But Lukin's actions had the opposite effect. The residents of these villages eventually joined Ataman Anenkov.
В январе 1919
In January 1919, Anenkov decided to get rid of the detachment of mountain eagles from the gorge. To do this, he equipped a group of his best people. However, this attempt was unsuccessful. 27 Anenkovites were killed in battle and 100 more people were frostbitten as they had to retreat along the river. Later, Anenkov wrote an appeal to his former friend Ilarion to join them, and they continued their struggle shoulder to shoulder. The answer was, "Brother Ataman, we know you. And we know that a good person fights for the people, but you go hand in hand with those Cossacks who fought with us, destroyed our fathers and brothers. And now they are enemies, and we're afraid of them, that they will not spare our lives, and therefore we will not leave." After that, the Ataman had repeatedly written to Lukin with a proposal to join his army, but he received no answer anymore. As a result, Boris Anenkov issued a decree that if one of the local villagers helps the partisans, Anenkov will destroy the village. This is not the only time when the White Commander offered to join the ranks of his army to opponents. Pyotr Tuzov, his photos also did not survive, but the Anenkov suggested that he cross over to his side, to which Pyotr Tuzov spat in his face and was killed brutally. He also died here in Cherkassk. However, it should be said that long before this event, Anenkov and Pyotr Tuzov, a military instructor sent to Cherkassk by the Turkestan Revolutionary Council, they met more than once at the talks and discussed not only the armistice, but also the capitulation of the village of Cherkasskoye. Also, according to documents of the court session about the Ataman, which happened much later in Semipalatinsk, Anenkov said that in one of those stages of the negotiations, Tuzov deceived him and secretly ordered his fighters to attack one of his flanks. Anenkov learned about this when he returned from a meeting with Tuzov.
Я много изучил документов, воспоминаний, но нету ни одного свидетельства о том, что красные творили, рубили людей, ну как говорили.
I studied a lot of documents, memories. There is no evidence of what the Reds did, not a single evidence that the Reds behaved with brutality, but there are lots of such things for the Whites. We must say that on both sides there were heroes who defended their idea, even if it is not so good. It was an amazing example of heroism and fortitude. They fought for their idea, and the idea was good. Let's not talk about what happened afterwards. People were tired of being under dictate, both power and religion, so they showed themselves as staunch fighters for their happiness. Coming up next, how did Cherkassk residents resist the experienced Ataman's army?
Сами лили пули.
They cast bullets themselves. It is interesting that the young people raided Balkash. They wanted to deliver salt for the participants of the Cherkassk defense. War always brings pain and suffering, and moreover, if it is a civil war when a brother fights his brother, the son shoots at his father, it is twice as hard. However, war reveals the hidden potentials of nature and fortitude in people who did not even suspect they could do this. In the Cherkassk defense, a lot of heroes appeared. I started working long ago, when some of the participants of the defense were alive, and they gathered on Sundays. They had a lot of memories. Well, they always spoke warmly about Ali Itayakovich Kutabarov. He treated the wounded people. He worked in the infirmary in Cherkassk. 5 paramedics who worked in the infirmary. He treated people with herbs. There also was a communications agent. Because for more than a year, Cherkassk was under siege. The liaison Abyshev Gabdali, who maintained contact with the northern Semirechynsk front. But there was no help. In the last period, a cannon was sent, which now stands near the museum. While being under siege, they had difficulties not only with medications, but also with painkillers, surgical instruments, and even wound closure materials.
Был еще такой врач, Алиби.
There was a doctor, Ali B. Kutibarov. Interestingly, that he did the most complicated operations at that time, in terrible conditions, when there was not enough medication, dressing material. They replaced the bandages with sheets at first, which brought the local residents, then with torn clothes. And now the participant of the Cherkassk defense, Fyokla Kurganova, gave almost all her clothes for the needs of the hospital.
Группа молодежи под руководством Фёклы Кургановой.
There was a group of young people led by Fyokla Kurganova. And the most interesting thing is that, being in the Sarkand region, talking with the war participants, everyone spoke about that girl. Well, she was an ordinary girl, 18 years old, member of Komsomol.
Первая комсомолка.
Личность Фёклы овеяна...
The personality of Fyokla is covered with riddles. There are no photographs or rather archival documents that would confirm her existence. Some researchers argue that there was no such a person, but some people talk about the exploits of the young Bolshevik. For example, how Fyokla Kurganova formed a detachment that helped to get everything necessary for the resistance participants.
Сами лили пули. Вот интересно, что молодежь.
They cast bullets themselves. It is interesting that the young people raided Balkhash. They wanted to deliver salt for the participants of the Cherkassk defense. There was a great need for it. Also, it was necessary to visit a number of mines, where lead for bullets was extracted.
Рудников, где добывался свинец. Для...
They loaded large caliber guns with lead and self-made gunpowder. And those weapons, by the way, had outlived its working lifespan.
Наверное, все было построено на энтузиазме, а вооружение-то было почти все.
Probably everything was based on enthusiasm. Almost all the weapons were handmade.
И даже пушки.
There was a craftsman, Zhukov, who made several guns. And even the guns that were used ages ago, they were repaired. And they were used in battles, and even damaged the enemies. Karp Maestruk assembled a detachment of Gavrilovskaya peasants, and they took part in the Cherkassk defense against Ataman Anenkov's troops. It is not clear when exactly Karp was born and how he arrived in the village of Gavrilovskaya. Now it is the city of Taldyk-Organ. Nevertheless, Karp Maestruk is also in the history of the Cherkassk defense. He was an ardent fighter against the White Guards. He did not receive a single wound in the fight with Anenkov. He even managed to withdraw his squad after the last line of defense fell. Nevertheless, he died 2 years after Anenkov strengthened here. It happened in 1921 near Khiva. The body of Maestruk was brought to his native village and buried with honors.
14 октября...
October the 14th, 1919, the defense fell. Anenkov's troops entered Cherkassk. As he later said in court, all the excesses and executions that his people did was just a sentence in accordance with the law of wartime. He did not admit that 70% of the rebels against him were ordinary peasants, and only 30% got combat experience on the fronts of the First World War. He said that these positions were defended by well-formed red units and not by ordinary peasants who rebelled.
Людей закапывали на дороге, а потом скакала конница и...
People were buried in the middle of the road, and then cavalry galloped there, and the heads flew to the sides. The horses knocked them down.
Мы вам...
Why would they do that? To intimidate, to show their power. Then a court session in Semipalatinsk. People who were at the trial, they fainted. Because terrible things were told, witnesses told everything they saw. Annenkov also denied those villainies that, according to the accusers, he did in the villages. He said that he only shot the heads of the resistance, he dismissed ordinary soldiers home. But the white ataman did not hold power in Cherkassk for long.
Закончилось тем, что отряды Красной Армии, направленные непосредственно из...
It all ended with the fact that the Red Army units, directed from Verny, helped these villages to get free.
освободиться.
Moreover, Annenkov was defeated, Dutov was defeated,
Дутов был разбит.
and they fled to the territory of the Xinjiang Uyghur region of China.
Синьцзяно-Уйгурского района Китая.
However, when leaving from Semirechye, Annenkov once again confirmed his bloody glory. He offered his soldiers the choice to follow him or stay here and then continue the fight against the Bolsheviks, gaining strength. Many decided to surrender their weapons and end the fight, but the ataman did not forgive them. He later shot everyone who decided to leave him and explained it at the trial in Semipalatinsk as punishment for desertion and betrayal. When he realized that he would not go to Verny, to anywhere, then he left to China, through the road of friendship along the Lapsy River, here in the gorge. He said, who wants to follow him to China can go with him, and whoever does not want to can lay down their arms and go home. But he created a bloodbath there, and with the rest of his people he had gone across the road of friendship to China. In China, Annenkov was arrested on April the 7th, 1926. The trial session began on July the 25th and it lasted until August the 12th, 1927. On August the 25th, Annenkov was shot. He never admitted his guilt and did not repent. At the trial, he said that he was loyal to the oath, to the Tsar, to the fatherland, and fought against the Red Bandits as best as he could. But the most shocking is that some of the participants of the Cherkassk defense were also shot.
Многие участники Черкасской обороны были...
Many participants of the Cherkassk defense were arrested and shot by the Soviet authorities. Why? Well, this is a mystery. What the authorities were afraid of, it is not known for sure. But some people were destroyed, some of those who were on the side of the Soviets.
на стороне Совета.
Undoubtedly, Annenkov and his army were distinguished by bloodthirstiness. It is not certain how many people were killed by them during the Cherkassk defense, just as it is not known how many Cossacks from the Ataman's army were killed by the Red Army. In any case, the siege lasted for almost 400 days, and during this time, thousands of people died on both sides. During the civil war and the change of power in the Semirechye, many wealthy peasants and intellectuals left these places. They fled to wherever the road took them, some to China, some to Afghanistan. Some decided to wait for the change of power, hoping that the Bolsheviks would not be able to stand at the head of the country for a long time. However, as history showed, they were mistaken. The Soviet power became the main force which no doubt made as much good and a lot of nasty and mean things with people who believed in it.
Но это уже будет другая история нового государства.
But this is another history of the new state where former heroes became enemies of the people and they were persecuted only because of their pedigree. However, it is worth paying tribute to all participants of the Cherkassk confrontation for their steadfastness, courage and bravery. But we all understand that no one can be a winner in a civil war. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It was the Time Puzzle. See you.